Well, South Africa, it is our responsibility to inform you that a blue wave is coming. Because of the collapse of service delivery, and the DA now believes it could possibly govern metros, including Johannesburg, Tshwane, Cape Town, Nelson Mandela Bay, and even eThekwini, after the upcoming local government elections, of course. Moreover, at the party's elective conference, the DA ushered in a generational change of leadership, where the oldest person in the top brass is now just 45 years old. The DA is now knocking on the door of the youth vote, which is largely unhoused, as the youth feel they have no political home. But will the DA succeed where others have tried and all have failed? In a conversation I had with the DA's new leader, Geordin Hill-Lewis, he's a mere 39 years old, but he says it's not the media's fault or the electorate's fault that they do not, or we do not, see the DA as a black party. He admits the DA needs to do some serious introspection so that it appeals to the majority of black South Africans. And he's also arguing now that the ANC and the DA can find each other on things like economic redress and national health insurance if, and that is a very big if, both parties have good faith actors at the table in future coalition talks. My name is Hajra Omarjee from Business Day. Joining us in conversation today is the Sunday Times deputy political editor, Lizeka Tandwa, Sunday Times political reporter, Kgothatso Madisa, and Business Day's political correspondent, Thando Maeko. Welcome to the political arena. We don't often spend so much time with the Democratic Alliance, and they seem to be saying all the right things. But Thando, welcome to the political arena. Do you think we should believe the DA?
I don't think it's a matter of belief. We should rather judge them by what they have done before and what they're planning to do. So they're planning to grow, number one, to be South Africa's biggest party by 2029. And they've already started laying the groundwork, particularly in metros ahead of this year's 2026 local government elections. So I think that if they achieve their goal of being either the outright majority in the majority of the metros or either forming part of those coalitions, then they have a good chance of being the biggest party in 2029. All of it, of course, also depends on how much the ANC will decline by then.
But Lizeka Mara, the DA may be saying all the right things, and like with anyone else we speak to, we want to give Geordin Hill-Lewis the benefit of the doubt. But the reality is, where the DA has been elected, for example, in the city of Johannesburg, as well as the city of Tshwane, as well as the Western Cape province, they then, once they elected, appoint a mostly white male executive. And surely that doesn't stand 30 years into democracy.
I was speaking to a number of people in the DA at the conference, people who are favoring Geordin. There's a large cohort, obviously, of the leadership which wanted Geordin, and some who are skeptical. But the one thing that they all say about Geordin is he's a way of working, is that he's inclusive. He's proven to be inclusive.
He's a bridge builder.
Yes, and he's done that even in council, where if you speak about Geordin, I think that we've written a couple of stories, Kgothatso, about Geordin and the union buildings and how he's favored in the union buildings, how the president even will go on and on and on speaking about how grateful he is that Geordin was able to house them as parliament during the time after the National Assembly was burnt down. So he has had a good relationship with the ANC in council. And I think that we're talking about someone who is, and something that Andrew Whitfield said to me in the last interview that I had with him.
The DA's Eastern Cape leader.
The DA's Eastern Cape leader, who was unceremoniously fired by the president. And he said that, Geordin brings emotional maturity. And I think that's what the president wants. That's what the president feels has been lacking with the previous leader. He's had issues with the former leader of the DA, John Steenhuisen, which he publicly has stated, that he doesn't feel that he is the liberal man that Ralph Meyer was. And perhaps that's what the DA needs in order for them to find that relationship with the ANC going forward. The reality is that we are in an age of coalitions. We are not going to see a DA that is, I disagree slightly with Thando. Okay. We are not going to see a DA that is going to be the majority party in 2029. We're likely going to see a DA moving slightly, increasing slightly its voter registry.
The question is, how slightly is it going to increase, Kgothatso? So Geordin's argument is South Africans are the black middle class and the black working class are for of the ANC. They want South Africa to work. They want service delivery. They want to not drive to work on roads with potholes and robots that are down. So he thinks the DA can get 30%, maybe 35% in Johannesburg, for example, and then jump from 22% to 30% nationally. So do you think South Africans are that hurtful with the ANC?
Look, the fact that the DA now has a younger leader is going to work in their favor. The ANC likes saying, the people who don't come out to vote, which is mostly young people, they don't come out to vote because they don't want to, they are angry at the ANC, but they don't want to vote for any other party. So Hill-Lewis now has an opportunity to go to those young people, convince them that, we've seen where the ANC has failed and we're willing to, take over and improve or fix. I think the only problem is that where they've governed, and they keep making noise about how well they've governed the city of Cape Town, I think the problem is they're being exposed, because yes, you focused on the affluent suburbs in city of Joburg, but you've neglected places like Khayelitsha.
And Lizeka, we need to do our own analysis on that, right? Because the DA says it's rolled out more services than any other municipality or metro to your Khayelitshas, Guguletus, etc. But at the same time, we're hearing from the ground that Cape Town has become unaffordable for the working class.
And I think I just want to go back to your intro and what Kgothatso has said, because you've talked about the youth vote that has not found expression, that has not been housed.
And everyone's tried.
But then, if everyone has tried, and if the youth vote says, we don't particularly want to go against the ANC, but we don't like what the ANC is doing, they could have gone for the EFF. The EFF has kind of positioned itself for the longest time as a party for the youth.
Yeah, but
the youth does not vote.
If social media were to be believed, or Julius Malema's influence or popularity amongst the youth were to be believed, he'd be the president of South Africa.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that whatever happens in social media is immaterial to me. What I'm talking about is how the EFF has positioned itself in terms of the EFF has been very strong in universities. The EFF's what's their youth They are youth league of student command. Student command has been one of. It has led in terms of how in terms of the university structures, and it's taken over from SASCO, and it's done the work. But when we see it does not translate to votes in the ballots, and that's a problem. I do think that Geordin, in as much as he is he's got a younger generation, I think it's going to be very difficult for them. We do need to
discuss the EFF, but that will require a 3-hour episode. Thando, Geordin started DASO, who is the student arm of the DA. He founded DASO as a prodigy of Helen Zille. Do you think that is going to add impetus to try and appeal to this youth vote that is very not able to catch it?
And perhaps Thando can answer, where is DASO now?
DASO is still on the ground in universities. Of course, like you say, the EFF Student Command has really been able to capture a lot of those universities. But Geordin having started DASO and grown DASO, and then moved on to being a councillor in the city of Cape Town, and then MP, and then now eventually a mayor, I think it has given him a lot of experience on the ground on what it actually takes to grow something, or a political party, a new formation from nothing, exactly, to what it is now. DASO says when Geordin started DASO, SESCO had no competition in campuses, and right now Geordin has been able to grow it to a level to such that now when we speak of student politics, DASO is on the table.
All right, in just a moment, we're going to speak about Geordin Hill-Lewis's relationship with his mentor, Helen Zille, who he met when he was in high school, as well as how Salim Semanga, managed to beat Ivan Meyer, who's an institution in the Democratic Alliance, for the position of Federal Council Chair, but also how the interface is going to work between government and the Democratic Alliance, and what Geordin's iteration is of the GNU going forward. But before we go to ad break, on this unattainable youth vote, which seems just out of reach to everyone, Kgothatso, what are politicians doing wrong?
Very good question. But I think the youth, their take on politics is very different. And politicians have not changed tactic when it comes to politicking. And what I've realized is that regardless of who the politician is, the youth just can't connect. So for me, that's the first point, that you're politicking the same way you politicked in 1997. But now you have social media. The youth are on their phone full time. They are content creators. They are there, and they have their own voice. They don't vote. In typical black homes, when your father supports Kaizer Chiefs, you also likely going to support Kaizer Chiefs. Yeah. We've seen now with who's the on Madlanga Commission, there's a lawyer, I just forget his father. His father is a very popular lawyer. He also became a lawyer. But now the youth today,
yes,
the youth today, they don't they don't conform to that. So politicians have to change tactic, because as we've said, Julius Try, well, he's done pretty well because majority of EFF voters are quite young. The ANC is losing the youth. You can see with how they're performing in universities, with the youth league. I mean, we don't know with the ANC whether they're coming or going. So I think it's just a matter of finding a different way of politicking, man. Not your usual on the mic speaking about. Sorry to say this, but it's the recent thing that happened. Speaking about Chris Hani and giving back to or affording a stature to people who always fought for democracy. They don't resonate with that. So I think. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there for now, but I think it's just they just need a different way of politicking.
All right. Well, if you've been in politics for a long time, you'll know Helen Zille sometimes make hairdryer phone calls where you just hear a screaming rush on the other end of the phone. I'm sure that's something that Geordin Hill-Lewis has experienced. He said he's known Helen Zille for a long time. Although she is the outgoing DA Federal Council Chair, she remains the Mayor of Cape Town. And he said giving leaders a big job who are very vocal in the party is how he expects them to spend their energy. He also said they have various disagreements and have had big ones over the years, but he has managed to survive all of those as he deals with everyone from Zille to President Cyril Ramaphosa with honesty but respect. Lizeka Tandwa, Helen Zille is a big figure in South African politics, and she is seen as somewhat of a godmother or a goko to the DA, as she likes to be called. Do you think Geordin Hill-Lewis and her will continue to get along as he now has all the power behind him?
Well, Geordin has worked for Helen. Geordin worked for Musi Maimane. Geordin saw the downfall of Mmusi Maimane, and I think Geordin understands how to navigate himself around the DA figures, especially people like Tony Leon, Ryan Coetzee, the Helen Zillers of the world, and even the founders and the donors. So I think Geordin is not someone he's not naive. We might call him a young man, but he's not naive. He's managed to navigate himself around very stormy waters in the DA. And I do believe that, he is going to be able to, I sound like I'm a Geordin.
We're giving him the benefit of the doubt. It's the honeymoon period.
You know what? Geordin has proved to be, some people call him vicious. Some people call
really?
him, some people call him vicious.
That's not something I've heard.
Some people call him strategic.
What do you mean vicious?
I think in the way that he's navigated himself, even with the Mmusi Maimane, with how he and the relationship between him and Mmusi Maimane, I think Mmusi would have some words to say about Geordin and John Steenhuisen and that friendship and how that collapsed. But I think Geordin is someone who is going to be able to work under the conditions, under hard and tough conditions, under the pressure of Helen Ziller. But then there's also, he is at an advantage, unlike his predecessor, who at some point stopped talking to Helen completely. I mean,
yes, but let's not forget, John Steenhuisen, Mmusi Maimane were prodigies of Helen Ziller until they were not. Kgothatso?
Look, I think as much as Geordin is a protege of Helen, I think what he sort of did on the eve of the election at the Gallagher estate shows that he's trying to say to Helen, I am my own man. I mean, the fact that we kept hearing that there was a late night discussion around Geordin and the delegates, that he wants them to vote for Solly Msimanga. For me, it tells me that as much as Solly was not the preferred candidate for Helen, from what I hear, he then had to take a step back and say, okay, if I'm Helen's protege and people know me as such, what do I need to do to show that I am my own man? And I think this is one of that decision he took. But it also translate into this, having more black people, in the leadership of the DA. But I think for me, that was an indicator that, yes, Helen is there and Helen will probably still have influence, which is why I think it was easy for her to say, no, I'm going to leave national politics and
to
go
quote
to
Geordin,
Johannesburg.
give them a big job. If they're too vocal, give them a big job.
Keep them
busy. Exactly.
Yeah, I think Helen's next influence is definitely in Joburg and the new leadership here. I mean, she is running for Joburg mayor and she's been co-opted into the Joburg executive of the DA. Although she's not in council, she's still in the leadership. Whenever they have meetings there, she's in there making decisions. So she's definitely shifted her focus on being the godmother of national DA to being the godmother of the Joburg DA.
Yes, but Geordin believes Cape Town is the most important. I think most in the country would say Johannesburg is the most important.
Yeah.
And Helen has identified that out the gates. But Thando, I want to ask you about how Solly Msimanga beat Ivan Meyer for the position of DA federal chairperson.
Yeah.
That was the big upset, and Ivan Meyer is reported to have stormed out because he certainly wasn't expecting it. And no one in the old school, let's say white DA leadership wanted Msimanga to be elected.
I mean, I would also say that none of the DA traditionalists wanted Msimanga to beat Ivan. But what happens in the DA is that delegates don't necessarily vote. The person who wins is not necessarily the person who got the most votes. What happens is that the delegates get they get to rank their favorite. So the person with the highest rank on the ballot is the one that actually ends up voting. That's why when they announce...
So 1 out of 10?
Yeah, so you have, let's say, Hajra Omarjee, you have Thando. A person will rank Hajra 5 and will rank Thando 3. If Hajra gets more 5s than 3s, then Hajra is eventually the winner. And that's exactly how Solly Msimanga won federal
but I think it was also,
chairperson.
sorry to interject, I think it was also interesting that JP Smith on the night before voting comes out to publicly to say, I'm supporting Solim Simanga, going against an Ivan Mayor who is a Western Cape, a fellow Western Cape.
So Thando, I saw Thando on the floor after the DA conference, and she has some insight on how that happened.
So it was really, Solim Simanga had to capture a section of, I would say, the Western Cape cabal, and he managed that through, I think, his campaign manager, Mike Moriarty, who was also running Severe Gwarube's campaign, and she managed from not having any position in the DA leadership to garnering the most votes for the deputy federal chairperson after Soli Malatsi and Silius Brink. So I think the person that we have to talk about here is Mike Moriarty and how he managed to put Solim Simanga also on the table, convincing people in the Western Cape, which is I think the largest voting bloc after, and then Gauteng, to vote for Solim Simanga. I mean, he doesn't have a footprint. Solim Simanga doesn't have a footprint in the Western Cape, but people in the Western Cape managed to vote for him over their own candidate.
Mike Moriarty is someone we should actually invite into the political arena, because he has been the engine of the Progressive Caucus since Tony Leon's time, and he beat Helen Zille's candidates in this conference.
Where I was going with this is that I think it's quite interesting that there's a fracture in the Western Cape as well. I think we've seen that.
Yes.
The JP, I mean, is a very powerful figure in the Western Cape.
But would he get the DA to victory in an election if Geordin were to step aside?
I'm not sure that he would. I think that he is powerful on the ground, internally within the DA. I think we have to distinguish between the DA and the electorate. But I think it exposed that there's a fracture in the Western Cape, but also I think when I spoke to people about Ivan Mayer and him being quite a prominent figure in Western Cape government, but also the fact that he's coloured. Are we going to see a point where now the Patriotic Alliance comes in and starts pointing out that the coloured people, the coloured leaders in the DA have been, cast aside, and then they leverage on that. And what some people were saying was that, even though we had an Ivan Mayer for quite some time, but the Ivan, every time we tried to get him to go to that constituency and kind of appeal to it, he wasn't able to do it for us. So he wasn't really the person that we needed. So Soli might be able, which is why they're now talking about traditional leaders and so forth. Soli might be the person now.
And to bring back the black exodus that left. Kgothatso, in terms of what the way forward is, right? The electorate will ultimately decide whether or not it has confidence in the DA leadership. What should we be watching out for?
In terms of the electorate?
Yeah. Because they will have the ultimate say.
Sure. Look, I think we're too close to the elections, for the local government elections, for us to be able to say definitively that Geordin will make a huge difference. Look, I do think there's high chances that the DA will take over City of Johannesburg. They may not go over 50%.
Majority.
They may not go over 50%, but I do think they will come out as the biggest party. And I think the ANC is not taking that the fact that Helen is campaigning for this in the City of Joburg seriously. For instance, they don't
have a mayoral candidate until June, July.
Sure, but when last did you see Dada Morero, for instance, on the ground?
The last time I saw him on the ground was when he was fixing Helen Zille's pothole.
You understand? So they are now following Helen Zille instead of, and I think they're downplaying it, and it's not something to downplay.
Yeah.
And the risk here is that the ANC never recovers if they lose a province or a city. They never recover. And do you want to really downplay the fact that you may lose Joburg?
It's worth noting that Snuki Zigelala is quoted in our sister publication, The Financial Mail, saying the ANC is polling at 15% in the city of Johannesburg if South Africans went to vote today. Guys, as we wrap up, we've got to talk about the GNU and we've got to talk about cabinet. Thando, very quickly, what is Geordin Hill-Lewis's way forward on the GNU?
Well, first on the ground is meeting the leader of the GNU, the head of state, Cyril Ramaphosa, and then instituting his own internal review of the performance of the DA ministers in the cabinet and the wider executive and the deputy ministers. 6 cabinet ministers, 6 deputy ministers. And then based on that, Geordin is expected to make some sort of change in the DA's representation in the GNU. Of course, he's staying out, but we'll see how that process unfolds. I think over the next 3 months.
All right, so 3 months, and then the DA will give Ramaphosa names. Lizeka, should we expect a bigger cabinet reshuffle from the president in June or July?
I'm not sure, but I don't think that it's going to be earth-shattering. I do think that when it comes to Geordin's predecessor, there needs to be a lot of discussions there. Given that Geordin has decided to stay out in terms of cabinet, he will need someone who is a de facto
interface.
De facto government business leader. It would be very strange and not sustainable for him to put John as the leader of government business for the DA in President Ramaphosa's cabinet.
Well, technically, Ashu Sarupan should be, because he's now the Federal Council chair. He's Helen Zula.
He's said that he is leaving that position. So that remains to be seen.
He said different things to different people.
Oh, my God.
He seemed to change that the closer we got to conference. Politicians, of course, do speak with forked tongues. Thanks, guys. We'll be joining you again in another edition, I'm sure, to discuss the DA as we get closer to the elections. But as you heard from this discussion, the DA's ambitions to expand its support base and position itself as a governing party alternative are going to be put to the test in the coming months. The electorate will have the ultimate say, from key metros in questions to identity politics and whether it has broader appeal. That is what we discussed in the political arena today. Just as we've unpacked the DA, we will be turning the same lens on other parties in the weeks ahead. Every week, political editors alongside reporters in the rooms, on calls and tracking the shifting alliances will be here to analyze the power moves, unpack the politics and decode the spin. Thank you for tuning in. From me, Hajra Omarjee, and my colleagues Kgothatso Madisa, Lizeka Tandwa and Thando Maeko, it's goodbye for now.